Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Happy Monday. We are very excited to kick off the week with Charlie Bachtell, CEO of Cresco Labs. Very excited to sit down and chat through kind of the state of the current cannabis landscape, what catalysts are out there, and of course, talk about Cresco itself. So, good reminder if you're out there, have questions, comments, anything you want to throw in, you're always welcome to chat at any platform that you're on. So, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Twitter or X, you're welcome to just type them in and we'll try to get to them as we go. It can be just a simple hi. I feel like as we're kicking off a week, it's always fun to kind of see who's out there. So just a reminder that is there. Charlie, thanks so much for joining. I know we were chatting a little bit earlier, but how are you doing? How are you feeling this Monday morning?
I'm doing.
Of course. We were just chatting a little bit ahead. I know we'll talk a little bit about the sort of political overlay that we're seeing this year and how it relates to cannabis, but you're in Chicago and the DNC was just there. Would love to get a little update on what that was like for you. Did you really notice that people were in town? Was there a big difference? What was the?
We did. It was honestly, it was a really, I think, well managed event. There was a lot of preparation clearly went into being a good host city, and I could tell you, we felt it. I felt it as being a resident, but also I had several meetings and lunches of members that were in town, and the feedback from the visitors was pretty phenomenal for Chicago. So overall, I think it was a great event. It also allowed us an opportunity to get some of those, whether at the state or at the federal level, members to come through and see what professional regulated cannabis can look like too. So it was great.
I feel like that's exactly what you want to see. It's sort of that rapid fire exposure for a ton of different representatives, of course, all Democrats on the side, but to be able to actually see how it functions, what it looks like. I don't know if you can say, did anyone buy anything? Can you say that or no?
Yeah, look, they typically do when they come through. So it's always just a great opportunity to pull back the curtain and make sure anybody, again, at the state level or at the national level, that when they're working on issues related to this subject matter, it's really important that they've seen it with their own eyes. So always happy to host.
That's awesome. Well, again, thanks for doing that work. I feel like that's super important. We'll talk more about sort of the political overlay later. Do want to get into, for now, kind of the current exciting stories that are going on. Ohio still being one of them. It was just recently turned on. Would love to hear just again kind of about the entry into Ohio and how the first few days went. To start.
Sure. So I think the launch of and I would put it in air quotes, but the adult use program there, I think it's important that everybody realize that technically we still do not have the adult use rules in that state. So the way that we think about it is it really is still the medical program with the one modification that we're allowed to let non-patients come in the store as well. And so what that means is, as far as your typical approach to maybe a more traditional consumer products approach to cannabis is not present yet. It is still very medicinal in rule and in process and procedure. That's why if you saw any footage from the first day, there no signage, no celebrations at all. It was a typical Tuesday, except we were allowed to let non-patients in. Now that said, the data that's coming out of the state, I think is pretty strong, showing that even though there wasn't a ton of awareness leading into it, I think the industry was notified on the Thursday beforehand that we would be allowed to open on Tuesday. So from a consumer standpoint, there wasn't a lot of advance notice. And we saw that when people were coming in. Most people on that first day when I was there, most people were asking, is it true that we can buy adult use cannabis today? And so that I think you'll continue to see, as the rules get finalized, you'll continue to see maybe a more traditional approach to an adult use program and look and feel. But nonetheless, the data that's coming out shows that there was pretty strong adoption, even with this unique rollout.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. Just seeing, I think, those strong numbers that we have seen from Ohio, it sounds like there is still more untapped ultimately, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And do you think that just kind of comes out over time in terms of getting that message out, or is it, when that rules kind of really come into play, what sort of changes there to kind of get that?
Yeah, I do. I think there was a lot of the teams involved, ours included, from the operators in Ohio, I think did a great job of making sure that word got out through the typical news channels. There was a lot of coverage in those first few days, so that was very helpful, I think, to build awareness and momentum. Starting from that launch day. But I imagine there will be another opportunity when the rules get finalized and there are more avenues and ability for us to really connect and communicate with the public on the presence of the adult use program in Ohio.
That's fantastic. So ultimately, do you feel like, given the circumstances that everyone was given, things went, pretty to plan? Things are running smoothly. I know we've seen a good amount of states come online with adult use programs, and that's varied in terms of success, in terms of how they've been able to do that. But do you feel like relatively things have gone smoothly as we've been able to kind of build on the experience of previous states going on, or what's your take there?
Without a doubt, I could tell you just from our team, what I saw on the ground there, I was so just really impressed. Like, not proud, as I was proud also, but super impressed by our team's ability to do that transition and that overnight switch from patients only to anybody over the age of 21 coming in. And again, I remember what it was like in Illinois. It looked nothing like that. This is a well-oiled machine. This was really preparedness with a foundation of experience, and you could just feel it. And in hindsight, as we reflect on maybe these two different ways that adult use programs can launch, maybe Ohio is better off with this sort of maybe a more calm build, because in states that have this like predetermined date where people are waiting in line for 6-7 hours, like that's not a fun consumer experience. So this was a bit more manageable, and the numbers are coming in relatively similar to those other style of launches. So
that's fantastic.
Maybe we learned something here.
There you go. I love to hear it. And then hopefully, I do wonder, I know we'll talk about some other, markets and things like that. I feel like it helps prep you for Pennsylvania when that happens. I know also people talk a lot of the times about Ohio kind of putting pressure on Pennsylvania to kind of finally get it across the line. What are your expectations in terms of, does this push PA forward at all as well?
I think it does. I don't know how it wouldn't. Pennsylvania's been discussing this issue for a few years now, and there's been a lot of work done, and so it's not a surprise, and it's not a novel issue there that they're saying, oh no, like we need to pick this up. They've been working on it, and they're really close. There's bipartisan legislation circulating. It was worked on, over their break, over their recess. I can tell you we did have delegates from Pennsylvania that were, visited the industry when they were in town in Chicago, and got an opportunity to, again, see it with their own eyes of what regulated professional cannabis can look like. And I think all of that's important. So I think another neighbor coming online and launching their program and seeing it done successfully it can only help in the effort in Pennsylvania. And look, they are going to, and I think they're well aware, they are going to see residents of Pennsylvania patronize the Ohio program, and we've seen this, time after time. Even especially when a state has a medical program, there's a lot of people who do receive medical benefit from the consumption of cannabis who don't participate in the medical program for whatever reason, the application process, the fees associated with it, et cetera. So they're eyes wide open. I think they're seeing their neighbor come online, and that relationship between Pennsylvania and Ohio tends to be a competitive one. So
that is very true. I went to school in Pittsburgh, which was sort of near Ohio. So there definitely was that sports competitiveness and just states competitiveness, which I do think translates into, they have it, why can't we, kind of thing. And it's been so long for Pennsylvania. I know we're getting closer and closer every day, which I think is great. But as somebody who has spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, I am a little bit saddened that it's taken this long. I know we're getting there, and I know that's been the story of cannabis in some ways, but it does feel like we're on the precipice of things kind of changing over, which is fantastic, and super excited. Anything worth talking about in terms of, store locations, either between Ohio or Pennsylvania, that you're excited about? Any particular reasons, for being in those specific areas for those stores?
Sure. I think border stores, we've seen it. We've seen the story unfold for the last few years when you do have a neighboring state that doesn't have either a cannabis law or only a medical one, and a neighbor launches an adult use program. You do see stores that are relatively, located relatively close in proximity do well. We were fortunate to have our original store in Ohio is in Wintersville, which is very close. I think it's the first stop in the state. That wasn't really the idea, I think 5-6 years ago when we were fortunate enough to get that license, but now it's good fortune. But yeah, look, again, it helps show residents from neighboring states what a good regulated program can look like, and the public health, public safety benefits that come with it, let alone the job creation, tax revenue, everything. So it acts as a great indicator for decision makers in that state.
Yep, I definitely agree. Anything worth talking about on? I know we're waiting on some other states that, Florida, namely, to also make that change. How are you feeling about, those votes coming up? I think something like Ohio should bolster the confidence in places like that, because it is kind of not a true blue state, more of a mixed state. So kind of similar in some ways, can kind of have that conservative element. What do you think about, Florida so far?
Yeah, look, the polling that's coming in is relatively good. It's promising. That 60% threshold is challenging. It's a big number, but the polling results look really good. And to your point, Ohio, being that kind of purple state, it was a good indicator of what can happen when cannabis, along with the other issue of abortion, is on the same ballot initiative, or the initiatives are on the same ballot. And it was a good result in Ohio. I think Ohio's rollout is a great example of state understanding that once a law is passed, you need to launch that regulated program very efficiently and expeditiously. Unlike some other states that have struggled from the time that the law gets passed and really public health, public safety issues develop.
Yeah.
So I think, to your point, Ohio is a really strong example of the popularity amongst voters in the issue, and then how an administration that maybe wasn't in favor of it going into the vote can very easily understand that the voters have spoken, and now the state needs to do its part to have a successful rollout of a regulated, compliance-focused adult use program.
Yep. I think it's encouraging. We'll see. You're right. That 60% threshold is a little bit daunting in some ways, but I think the world and the US is moving in that direction. And I, again, feel somewhat confident in that, which I think is great. What do you make of Governor making all those comments still? Because I feel like there's a balance where you're hearing a lot of stuff from citizens in Florida that seem positive. They seem, to like the medical program that's in place currently, at least. But then you get all those comments every so often about the smell or this kind of silly comments. Do you kind of think of that as noise? Do you think of it as meaningful? Anything?
I always come back to, like you said, I come back to the fact that the vast majority of voters in America are in favor of a more progressive approach to cannabis, a regulated approach to cannabis, whether that's at the medical level or at the adult use level. And while of course there's differences of opinion, and of course it becomes a political issue, and so even the position that some politicians can take on it can be politically driven. I think the voters will speak, and again, I always come back to the fact that cannabis is one of the most popular issues with the general public, more popular than any candidate that's running for office. So it's a popular issue.
Yes, and we saw that definitely in Ohio, where that was the key thing. It had more votes than women's choice and all these different things as well. So I think that's an encouraging fact to remember, I think, in general. On the political side, would love to talk. I know Trump has alluded to making comments on Florida from a cannabis perspective. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that also kind of noise? What's your thoughts on how he's kind of talking about it right now?
Yeah, I would recommend that we wait and see what his comments are. It's tough to speculate. I think we'll know more, and I think it would be best for really interested stakeholders in this issue to just see what he has to say about it. But I like the fact that he has acknowledged that he should have a position on it, and I think that's important. As you look at the options that are in front of us come November at that national level for the White House, you do have both sides of the ticket that are both sides of the aisle that are showing in different ways an understanding that something needs to be done. And of course, on the left, you've got two very pro legalization candidates, and on the right, we spent a lot of time talking about the potential vice president's home state earlier in this podcast. So, he is seeing it unfold with his constituents in his home state as we speak, and I think the comments that candidate Trump had a couple weeks ago as to, as more and more states legalize, it is impacting the way that he is looking at it is a really important thing to hear.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, so looking at it only from that cannabis lens, because I know there's a lot to talk about in politics, but just from the cannabis perspective, how encouraged are you by kind of seeing the floor, I guess, for how pro-cannabis or, I guess, pro-cannabis, a candidate can be with Trump, I think at least moving up slightly. And then the Democrats seemingly, like you're saying, trying to push maybe for more coming out. How encouraging does it feel on that side of things versus 4 years ago when it was a little bit different, I guess.
I think that's a good way to articulate it. Is it does seem like the floor has been raised. The fact that there's an acknowledgement that there needs to be a position taken on it, that there needs to be an evaluation, is really important. So, look, it's tough. I know, myself included, all of us wish that reform would happen at a faster pace than it is at the national level. I don't think many people expected that there would be as much progress at a state level before we would see something happen at a federal level.
Yes.
But it takes time. And what you are seeing is, over this time, you're seeing that floor raise higher and higher at the federal level. And that's indicative of us getting closer and closer and closer.
Yep, more normalization, more kind of embracing from a public perspective and from a political perspective. I definitely agree there. So I think things are moving along. You mentioned also, I'm seeing some great questions, which we will get to. So thanks for asking them. Also, Dan's in the mix. Hey, Dan, great to see you. Would love to talk through kind of the catalysts we're seeing on the cannabis side. I know a lot of people are thinking, obviously, rescheduling is in the mix. Potentially something safe related, potentially something memo related. What are you seeing kind of on the federal reform side for cannabis?
Yeah, and this is just, again, observations, not necessarily anything in particular that is that we're hearing that's different than what's being discussed. But the expectations of still with reform going forward. I've mentioned this before. The one thing that we do know is that the highest levels of leadership in these applicable regulatory bodies and agencies are engaged on this issue. This is not something that surprised the DOJ or caught them off guard, or that they hadn't been prepared for. They had been, again, at the highest levels of leadership involved in this since the day that the president asked these agencies to reevaluate the issue. And as an industry, I think that's all we can ask for. Is it really is cannabis is getting the attention that all of us feel it deserves. So optimistic that will be moving forward. I think they're evaluating how appropriately to move it forward, and that includes whether there's a hearing or not. And I don't have any insight there, but I just know that the highest levels of leadership are involved. And as it relates to the other potential legislative initiatives, there's still the discussion of what can happen at year end for the lame duck session. A lot of that is going to depend on what happens at the ballot in early November, and what the makeup of the Senate is in the House, and who wins the Oval Office. But we do know that, again, the sort of the leaders of the issue have not forgotten about cannabis. It has not been pushed to the side. And fortunately, again, for us, you're talking about, especially on the Senate side, you're talking about two of the most senior leaders of both sides of the aisle are the leaders of the issue for their parties on cannabis. So we have the right leadership that is trying to figure out the way to make this happen, some level of reform. But again, the moving vehicle and the timing of it is dependent on what happens in November. So we'll see.
A waiting game in some ways, but that's true. I think ultimately, even with the rescheduling comment period that we saw recently, in terms of it being a popular issue, something that people care about a ton, we saw a ton of comments on that issue. So again, I think it's just one of those things where it is so popular. It is already here in so many states. It's a little bit of a lag in terms of regulating it and finding appropriate sort of guidance around it. But that I would imagine, would have to come at a certain point, just because, again, cannabis is already here. So I got to figure out how to not approach it and embrace it, I guess, ultimately. That makes total sense. One second. I'm seeing some questions come in, which are good. Okay, we'll get to them in a second. I did want to talk about just sort of how you as a company are, leader in the company, are kind of approaching the current landscape right now. What are you guys focused in on, drilling down in? Where is sort of the focus right now as we're heading into the end of 2024, which is crazy?
Sure. It's a unique industry in many respects, but it's also, maybe the mix of the industry is unique, but it's also driven by the same fundamental concepts that all industries are. And you have to focus on operating a very healthy company. That's something that you've seen us prioritize, over the last year and a half in particular, just because it's very difficult to forecast what happens legislatively and from a reform perspective. There's so many things that are outside of our control. And if I was going to sum up really the focus of the organization over the last year and a half, 2 years, has been to really prioritize the things that are within our control, try and influence, help the things that are outside of our control, but you have to build a company for the rules of the game that exists today, and making sure that you are creating the most fundamentally sound, durable, disciplined organization in today's climate to best prepare you for what can happen or could happen in the future. And that's what you see with Cresco, and the results that we've been able to post now for several quarters in a row. Just the improvements of solidifying the base, making sure that we're continuing to get better as an organization, which will allow us to take advantage of the opportunities as they unfold in front of us, whether that's from a growth standpoint, through M&A, through organic growth, or even some of the other opportunities that are presenting themselves to be worthy of developing an opinion, like non-US cannabis. That's something that I think is relatively maybe more recent for us. Is you have to develop an opinion on what's going on in these other countries that have moved forward with federal legalization, and what that could mean for the industry at large.
Yeah, that's fantastic to keep an eye on those opportunities, because it is, as much as we talk about it in the US as cannabis being kind of not an American issue, but something that is growing here, it is kind of a global trend, right? Where we are seeing it, everywhere. I know Canada beat us to it a little bit, but hopefully we're doing it better. We'll see. But yes, okay, that's great to hear. And I think that's an important reminder and a great way to look at it, where you're looking at it as ultimately a company first, company in cannabis. And of course, that's an important aspect, but hitting those fundamental aspects. And again, that is kind of reflected in what you posted earlier this month, which is great. On the earnings side of things, you mentioned, so keeping an eye on international potentially opportunities. Would love to hit on this question from Brian, which kind of brings in the hemp component. I know that's also been a big discussion this year, both from kind of a competitive aspect, but also some companies embracing it. Would love to know sort of your general feelings on hemp currently, and then we'll get into this question specifically as well.
Yeah, my perspective on hemp is it's really no different than it is for cannabis. And at the end of the day, splitting hairs, you're dividing these two cannabis sativa plants into these two categories. For us, I think just at a regulation level, the cannabinoids themselves are what should be regulated. And the fact that the origin of the cannabinoid right now is kind of how it's looked at a federal level as being this distinction between hemp or cannabis. Is I just think it's wrong.
Yes.
Um, THC is THC is THC.
Mhm.
But so as I look at the hemp industry, and of course the non-intoxicating cannabinoids, set those aside. It's as I look at the development of more of the intoxicating hemp industry. For me, it's the same as it is for cannabis. In order for cannabis to achieve its potential, in order for the reform that all of us, and not even just us, the generations that have been advocating for reform on cannabis, in order for it to be successful, it has to be responsible, it has to be respectable, and then it can become robust. Like that's how we talk about it all the time. Responsible equals respectable equals robust for cannabis. It's the same thing as for hemp. It's this cannabis plant itself. So a responsible and respectable approach to hemp, we're all in favor of. But any sort of conduct or action in hemp or in cannabis that can jeopardize the momentum of obtaining greater reform for cannabis at a state or at a national level, we can't support, right? It's kind of that's the position that we have as it just relates to the cannabis plant in general. Responsible equals respectable equals robust.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, because it is kind of hard. I am split myself a little bit just because I think it can be an on road for people who aren't maybe familiar with cannabis, don't use it as much to kind of get familiar with it, and especially in states like Brian was mentioning in Texas, to kind of get small access, to kind of get in. But you're right that there are sometimes players or just smaller operations that maybe are getting a little fast and loose with it. And if somebody has a bad experience, that can also kind of turn them off to cannabis potentially, before they really get involved with a company that is taking it very seriously and taking it kind of from a safety perspective. So it's a little bit tough. We'll see. Do you? Okay.
Well, and look on that point, like what we've been talking about this whole time, like we have not obtained what we need to obtain yet for cannabis. Like if nobody is taking a victory lap here, nobody is celebrating, nor should we. We have so much work to do that's still in front of us, and it can easily go the other direction if we don't. Oops, sorry about that. I don't know how to shut that off yet.
Okay.
If we don't, we have to change people's perspectives. We have to change opinions to get laws changed in order to have an industry going forward. So anything that would jeopardize that is a risk.
I think that's a great perspective to have. Again, I think you do a great job of not speculating and trying to get ahead of yourself, looking at what's actually there, but also keeping your foot on the gas and not saying it's in the bag. Everyone likes cannabis, which I think a lot of people like cannabis in the U.S., but not saying the work is done and it's so easy. I think you're out there doing the work, which is great. Question from Brian, which is two-part, kind of asking. You don't have to, I guess, disclose particularly how much you own, but maybe kind of talking through insider buying in cannabis. How important do you think it is? What are your thoughts kind of on that?
Yeah, look, as far as what I think my holdings in the company are public. I'm one of the larger shareholders, individual shareholders. I did acquire stock last year. It's something that I regularly evaluate, but at the same time, I think it's important to understand the windows that we have to either buy or sell in this industry are super small, and especially when there's ongoing material components to it too, like pending M&A. Or discussions at the M&A level. So it's not that easy also to buy or sell. But look, one of the largest shareholders, incredibly vested in the success of this organization and the industry at large. So couldn't be more committed to the
Your own cooking.
success going forward.
The classic. Okay, that's good. That's exactly what you want to see, I think. Fantastic. All right, well then, any final thoughts on things that we haven't touched on before I talk Labor Day coming up? Anything that we've missed? I think no, right? We've hit a lot.
Mhm.
All right, let's hit Labor Day then. So I feel like everyone talks about 420, of course, and some of the other more major, Green Thursday, Green Wednesday, ahead of Thanksgiving and everything. I know
Mhm.
Labor Day is also one that is normally historically a big sales holiday for cannabis. Would love to hear if that's true, if you have any expectations there. And then, of course, if you've got a product that you're loving right now, we'd love to hear about it. People are hitting the stores.
So I would say yes, the cannabis specific holidays, especially 420, tends to be a really big day for the industry. It's front of mind for consumers. I think it has reached that level of awareness that people outside the industry talk about that date. They recognize that that is a big day in the cannabis world. Outside of that, I think the Fridays leading into any holiday tend to be pretty strong for a variety of reasons. I don't know if any of the other specific cannabis holidays like 710 get anywhere close to 420, but the days leading into any of your long weekends tend to be strong, and so we look at it from an industry perspective. We do look at that as an indicator of sort of the health of the market at that time, and whether or not it meets expectations is a good indicator of how healthy the marketplace is.
Yeah, fantastic. Did you have a favorite kind of crossover celebration from this most recent 420? I feel like I saw McDonald's had a receipt that they posted that was a 421 that was funny. I don't know. Were there any fun crossover posts, companies?
I don't know. I think there were some good, there's always good ones. I forget on the more traditional industry, but like look, for this year for the Super Bowl, we launched an infused hot wing sauce, right? So it's getting more and more, the crossover opportunity is there for these big events. No doubt about it.
That is true. I love that Super Bowl thing. That was so much fun. Ugh, I wish I could have got my hands on it. What are you going to do? All right. Well, then are you indulging yourself at all? I know, again, it's hard because you're working hard, but also you probably want to be familiar intimately with your products that you're using.
Sure.
Anything for this Labor Day for you specifically?
So, and I don't know if I've talked about this or not, but interestingly enough, I'm kind of on a self-imposed hunger strike of since last October. I want to see federal reform get across the finish line, and so it's a challenge. I do this regularly through my life. I've kind of always set these objectives to hit before I can do something, but typically our liquid live resin is a favorite product. We're just launching in Illinois a brand called Tea Time, which is part of the Good News portfolio that's geared towards the golf regular. So it's really geared towards the golfer. I think that from a it's lemonade flavor. It's a very fun product, and I look forward to trying it myself, hopefully soon.
There you go. I feel like on the bar carts or whatever they have at golf courses, they need like a cannabis cart as well that they can move that around. It'd be awesome.
It's so not uncommon to see the pen in the pocket these days. So we're leaning into it.
Benjamin, I definitely have heard of that before. All right, fair enough. Okay, well, Charlie, thanks for taking the time to check in. Really, really appreciate it. I feel like there's just so much going on this year. The summer, I feel like normally should be quiet, but it has been so busy. So appreciate you taking the time to kind of chat through a little bit. Anything excited for the rest of your day? What's your highlight coming up? Anything today that you're hyped about?
The work-wise, we've got a busy couple of weeks coming up. So a lot to arrange and get scheduled out here. But no, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you, and available anytime.
That sounds good. All right. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for being here, and thanks for your questions. Really, really appreciate it as well. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, we're going to have, of course, Dan Aarons back in the mix. So if you have any questions, hold them for them. All right. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.